Hello, and welcome to Journeys into Being, a new show co-produced by Amherst Media. My name is Renata Sylvia Pienkawa, and I'm your host. This program will focus not on doing, but on being, not on accomplishments, but on the joy of being fully present, not on what many people call success, but on our ability to be in flow, to be connected to each other and to the world through our very presence. Welcome, Steve, to the Amherst studio. We're so pleased to have you.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Very honored and grateful. And just to ease us into the process of interviewing, what object or objects did you bring today that would reveal something important about you?
Well, Renata, actually, I brought two objects. The first one was after you invited me, and I came across this, and I don't know if you can all see what this is. It looks like a fish, and it's carved out, and it's to make patterns on saris in Bangladesh or in India. It's a print for printing, and this one has special meaning to me. A friend of mine had passed away, and they said everyone could take something from the house, and
Wow.
I decided on this. But the other thing is I've done a lot of work on fish and the relationship of fish and culture in Bangladesh. I did research. I helped found an organization that tried to reconnect the rivers and the floodplains and so on. So fish have always, I even signed a fish under my name as well. But at the same time, fish are such an important part of cultures, and this is kind of a cultural object, so that fish also mean fertility in South Asia. So this has a lot to do with work that I've done in the past and things that are very meaningful to me. And the second object is at the age of 80, suddenly I had this impulse to draw. Previously, maybe 3 months ago, I couldn't even draw stick figures, and then suddenly, and this particular one, I did yesterday, and I call it The Secret of Happiness. And it's related to a Chinese scroll where these two men are discussing the secret of happiness. And often when we think about happiness, we think of in individual terms. What do I have to do to be happy? So we can go deeply into meditation is one way, or we could get a lot of money or do all these different kinds of whatever you think drives you to find. But their discussion about happiness was when the emperor is good, and when the country is good, and the crops are well, and so on. And I think, considering where our country is today, and so on, that unless we can find what's good for the community and best for all, and leadership and responsibility, so that's kind of my interpretation of the Chinese scroll.
Wow, that's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And very moving because of where our country and the world both are at this point. So it's very poignant to think about, a philosopher king or a wonderful leader who would care about all the people and care about the well-being and happiness of the community, not just.
So this is the secret of happiness, the lifting the whole community, the country, and so on. I thought it was just a very, very beautiful concept.
Wow.
Some things that are very essential to the way in which I view the world as well, and in terms of my experience. I had mentioned this, it come from Bangladesh. In 1971, I was involved supporting the independence struggle for Bangladesh. And at the end of 71, I actually went into the country just as the war had ended with Indian Army permission. And along the way, I felt it was a stunningly beautiful country. People don't realize how beautiful it, and I'm going to say was, because it's transformed in the last 55 years. I mean, it's transformed greatly. But it's a floodplain.
Right.
And so quite a culture and the interaction. And I began to realize that the people and the fish were intimately connected, that the connection was really profound. And Bangladesh had the richest inland fisheries in the world. It had almost 300 inland species of fish. And I wound up, first I wandered into Bangladesh as a kid wandering into Bangladesh.
Why Bangladesh? Why
Well, I got caught up in the independence struggle. I had been to India. In my junior year in college, I was invited to be a university ambassador on what was called the Experiment in International Living. And I chose India. And at that time, Bangladesh was called East Pakistan. So I never really got there. But I was in Calcutta, which was close. And then when the independence struggle for Bangladesh came out, I realized there were people there, and I got very drawn into it. I had no idea that I would be drawn into the country for the rest of my life in some ways. Yeah, I even have a Bangladeshi daughter. So.
Wow. How
But
long did you live there? How long
well, my first time I was there for a few months. Then I came back for about 5 years, and then I've been going back and forth since the 70s, 80s. 80s, I did a lot of work. In the 90s, I did work, and then there was a plan to. This again is very important. What's often missed in the name of development or progress is the relationship of people to nature, the connections between people and nature, and there was a plan to end floods in Bangladesh. It was called the Bangladesh Flood Action Plan. A Bangladeshi general dictator, along with Mitterrand in France, were going to end floods forever. But I got very nervous when they said that, because I knew that poor people depended on the floods, and that they ate a great variety of wild fish and so on. So the idea was to end floods, grow rice, and then have fish cultivation. So I carried out research called it was called the nutrition and the biodiversity of fisheries in Bangladesh. I was very lucky because of this flood action plan. I was able to get a lot of money to carry out the studies. I did a number of studies, and we found we visited homes 4 times a year and weighed and measured what kind of fish they were eating and identified them, and took a lot of cultural stuff. I had field workers, and we found that poor families were consuming between 50 and 75 different species of fish in the course of the year. That's phenomenal. And that the World Bank and others were calling these miscellaneous or non-economic species, most of them. And in fact, they were nutritionally very, very rich. Because the idea that people were so connected to nature was missing from the development paradigm. We're going to build them up, and so there was no measurement of what they already had, and what they had was women at night would put out a trap behind the house. The water was right there, and in the morning they'd have shrimp for breakfast. With rice.
Such an ignorance of
ignorance of that, right? So I got very deep into that. So far, that along the way, in combination with some other research, I realized that the birth cycle. Human birth cycle seasonally was tied to the availability of fish. So if a woman, for example, runs a marathon, if they become a marathon on a regular basis, they stop ovulating because there's so much taken out of the body. And village women in Bangladesh, basically, because of the diet and all the hard work they did, they were like running a marathon all year. But there was a period from the cusp of October, November for about 3 months when there was suddenly an abundance of fish, and they had all this animal food which they didn't have access before. So they start to ovulate. 9 months later, they were born. The baby is born just at that time again. So when they're breastfeeding, they didn't take the calcium from their own bones. They got the calcium from the fish they ate.
Yes.
So it was this incredible cycle that existed.
Yes.
And in the name of development, it was obliterated. So this is,
Wow.
I was very, very...
Yeah, so explain to me, because, and forgive my ignorance, Bangladesh is known as one of the poorest countries.
Right.
Like that's the kind of...
Sure,
common-
Kissinger called it a basket case.
Right.
Yeah.
So is it still, poor in the eyes of the so-called developed world?
Well,
or is it not? And why is it considered so poor if they have such wonderful ways to sustain themselves?
Well, all right. It's a long history. Remember, Bangladesh was the oldest. Bengal was the oldest British colony. I think it was over 400 years.
Mm-hmm.
So it was ruthlessly exploited.
Mm-hmm.
All right. But so secondary, after independence from India, Bangladesh was East Pakistan. There was East Pakistan, West Pakistan, and West Pakistan had the more military, so they exploited East Pakistan as well. But eventually, the Bangladeshis really resisted, and they tried to protect their mother tongue, Bengali, the language, and so on. But the bottom line was that people did not value resources. They valued the environment, giving it a value. Let's say like Native Americans may know how to burn a forest to help the forest grow. There's traditional practices, and here these people are eating these little fish. People, the economists that came from the West would have no idea that these are any value, and it's only by focusing attention on that. So basically, out of this experience, we found that these flood control embankments were actually denying people resources that were practically free, and instead making them go to the market or to cultivate fish and so on. So some Bangladeshis who worked with me formed an organization called the Center for Natural Resource Studies, and what we try to do is find a place where we can reconnect the river and the floodplain. And there was such an abundance of fish, aquatic life, all kinds of aquatic life. Later we planted trees that could resist water like, trees that mangrove type trees, but for fresh water. And then birds would come from all over. Lovers found places to hide. There were all these, it was amazing. So working with the environment and so on, and working with people who were in touch. I mean, I was very lucky. I lived with I lived with in India, and it was about 66, 67. I wound up living with untouchables in the middle of a famine in a village. So I understood what people's needs are, but what their accomplishments are. And then in Bangladesh, again, I lived with a large family, extended family of basically poor people. So I understood, like, these little fish were so valuable to them and so on. So my perspective of development was very different. It was kind of more grassroots and so on. And therefore was not
part of that culture, right?
Very much.
So when you had a partner, because you had a
right, very much part of the of the culture there. Anyway, so that's what this object kind of represents.
Right. And this object has the beauty, has the wood, has the rubber.
Sure. It's all handmade, and then the people would be putting this down.
But also on men's outfits too, or just women's outfits?
Well, I think the fish would more likely be on a sari, but you'll often find fish, even in slums in the city. You'll see people who draw fish on the walls. It's kind of like a memory from the villages. And I discovered in my research also in South Asia, fish are given at a wedding. It has to do with fertility as well, which goes back to my concept that the birth rate, historically, it's been destroyed now, historically tied to the fish cycle, the flood cycle, and all of that, so that people were very much part of nature.
And also the fact that that we came from water.
I wrote a book, which I didn't get published. It was called The Water People, which is, and I believe very much that was missing in history is wet history. that so much of history had to do with being close to rivers and the ocean and flood, because there was the abundance of food. Civilizations grew up through that, and there's, so we generally talk about the history on dry land, but in fact so much of human history and evolution really took place close to water.
That's true, and we love the Connecticut River here.
Of course, of course.
Love the history of that, and Mark Twain, and the Mississippi River, right? It's pretty
but the Mississippi, and that goes back again, the connection. So the model for from 1952, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers first got involved with flood control in Bangladesh. And the model was from the Mississippi River, where you build these large, in Bangladesh you call them embankments, but I forget exactly what you call them in English here. But the thing is, you try to channel the river, stop it from flooding, and of course, eventually something would break and you'd have terrible floods because the river needs to spread out. I mean, that's where it is. So when the energy is like this, it's a mild energy. But when it's like this and then it breaks something, it's a fierce energy. And it picks up sand and other things and ruins the land. So part of the model for flood control, which I campaigned against for many, many years, was basically on the model of taming the Mississippi rather than allowing places for the water to settle. And along with that, there are these incredible fisheries. But if it's not, but that way it's kind of, it's easy access for everybody, and it's not, it's not as controlled. But so there are connections. It's all over the world. It's a global Africa as well, global as well. Nile, of course,
Egypt. So, but how did you tame your Western, or did your Western nature of a person, who is more self-conscious and, has kind of, the way our Western culture has been, these inner quarrels with ourselves. Did you, when you were there, did you calm those kinds of forces, or they never fully calmed down, and that's why you came back?
Well, this is, Renata, ever since I met you always ask the greatest questions. You're amazing. No, seriously. Well, I mean, again, we have to go back into my history a little bit. So in 1965, I was at a place called Hofstra University, and I became the university ambassador on the experiment in international living, and I chose to go to India. And so I was already used to living with a family. The whole model there was you live with families rather, separately. Then in 66, 67, I got a Fulbright to go back to India, and I was supposed to be teaching English, but that was the year that the students in northern India where I lived were on strike against the English language, which freed up me and a friend named Mike McConnell. He was another Fulbright student at the time who allowed us to travel around and explore and so on. And we went to see a man named Vinoba Bhave, who was known as Gandhi's spiritual advisor. Michael was one to introduce me. And anyway, so we went to see him, and Martin Luther King, when he went to India, went to see him. All right,
to meet
Vinoba Bhave. So when Michael and I went up to see Vinoba, it's kind of a really lovely story in terms of development of a young person's life. We went to see Vinoba, and the secretary said, well, if you have any questions about the movement, he had a land reform movement. It was where rich people would give gifts of land to poor people because they had so much land. And villages, they give gifts of villages. It was called Bhudan land movement, Gramdan, the village movement. I went to see Vinoba, his secretary. I remember his secretary had 6 fingers. I'd never seen on both hands. It was very odd. But he said, well, if you have any questions about the movement, you can ask me. Only if you have a question I can answer, you can ask Vinoba directly. So, I mean, I was just out of college. I got to see him. So I thought up a question, and I had just read Andre Malraux's Man's Fate, and in it, it's about these communists, and they get sabotaged by the Kuomintang. They were supposedly on the Chinese nationalists and so on, and almost all of them are obliterated. So I came up with this question, and again, I'm 21, 22 years old, and the question was, is God the willingness to die for something you believe in? So the secretary said, now I remember I engineered this question, yes. The answer, they said, well, I don't know what, I can't answer this. So the next day, Vinoba would go out for a walk early in the morning. He was very old at that point. And then he would come back, and all these people would be sitting in a room. And at some point, Michael and I were bored in front of Vinoba. And so at some point, Vinoba said, well, what's your question? So I asked that question. And he broke out laughing. He broke out laughing. And the whole room filled with laughter. They're all laughing. And it was an experience that, for me, it was a spiritual, it's like things just opened up. And I actually have a poem about that. Maybe it's in this book. Actually, I do have a poem about it, where suddenly I saw for a moment the vastness of my ignorance. Because we always like to think we know so much. Yes. When you're young, you really think, you really think, yes. And it's just, I had a glimpse of the vastness of my ignorance. And then Vinoba says, oh, what are you doing here? And I said, well, we're here to study you. And again, he broke out laughing, and the whole room filled with laughter. And then he stopped and he says, you can't study us, you can only work. And then he sent me to live with untouchables in the middle of a famine. In the village. So that was transformative. It was like, so suddenly my education about the world changed dramatically. So yeah, but let me read that poem. I think if I can find it, I wasn't intending on reading that one. So this is from my first book of poetry, which is called Where People Are Trees.
What year is that from?
About 3 years ago or so. Okay. Okay. So the name of this poem, which refers back to my experience with Vinoba, is called Limitless. Okay. I saw with my own eyes the vastness of my ignorance. Before I knew, before I forgot, before a laughing sage. Sparkling laughter filled the hall. The curtain disappeared. Day became night. For a moment I can see how far I could not see. Day returned. I felt love. I felt loss. There was a larger lesson to be learned. Being a young artist, I could not grasp its full meaning. The colors spread more slowly now. Has the canvas grown, or am I smaller?
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
What a moment.
Yeah, it was for me, it was, as terms of experience, literally, I was starving. And at the same time, historically, a couple of things. One, the Indian government was denying there was a famine. And some people came out, somebody from Oxfam in the UK and Catholic Charities came out to the village I was staying in, and they said, is there a famine? And I said, follow me, and I showed them around that it was obviously a famine. Then they went to New Delhi and screamed there was a famine. Later, the Indian government brought all these people in, and they called me a liar. Whatever. It was election year, and they didn't want to happen. But there, my problem became managing television stations. All these camera crews were coming in because suddenly there was a Western kid in the middle of a famine. But it helped generate a lot of awareness of the fact that there was a famine. Right. And it was written up in the Indian newspapers and so on. And then Marlon Brando came to see me.
Wow. Well, we'll talk about
it's another time. It's another session.
So in a way, this moment, I just want to go back to that moment. It was like when we talk about, peeling the layers from an onion.
Right.
Like a few layers were just peeled off, and you were more.
I suddenly became aware of I mean, what I know compared to what I don't know, I mean, what I don't know is vast, you know. And at there were times in my life when I suddenly realized I'm so certain about something, and in fact, it's a mirage. I'm fooling myself. So Maya. So in terms when I write things, I'm constantly challenging myself. I'm questioning myself. I'm saying, well, there's another way of seeing this, isn't there, or something like that. And that had been very helpful. And at one point I was writing for Mother Jones and other magazines as doing investigative reporting, and I got attacked very viciously by people who didn't like what I did. And I realized you just have to make sure you see every possible angle on everything to make sure that.
So you're talking about both the content and the form,
and the motivation too.
And the motivation.
Content, form, and motivation. That's really true.
Consciousness.
Yeah. Like if I write a poem, why am I writing it?
Yes.
You know, I have in my new book. It's called Moral Oblivion, and it's about the terrible times we're in. You know, goes back to some earlier terrible times like the Vietnam War and so on. Wow. But the question is, what's your motivation? I mean, I write articles for websites and newspapers and so on. Well, I started a little bit, I guess, after college. The first poem I wrote was in college, and I showed it to a fellow student, a woman who was an English major, and she broke out laughing. But then I was invited to the University of Iowa to be a visiting scholar, and somebody had read an article I'd written about a disease called Kala-Azar, visceral leishmaniasis, that was also caused by the flood control embankments in Bangladesh. And so I had this wonderful situation where I was invited to Iowa City, which is poetry's in the air there. I mean, there'd be 3 or 4 readings a night, and it was kind of infectious, you know. So suddenly I found myself writing poetry when I was there. And then,
how old were you then?
I was probably about 50.
Okay.
You know, and then later, I went to Brattleboro. I remember I lived in Greenfield for a long time.
So let me ask you a question. Why did you come back to the States if you were so rooted in over there in
Bangladesh?
And
well, it's very complicated for a number of different reasons, but eventually in Bangladesh, UNICEF heard that there was this person who would go around in the villages and who spoke Bengali, so I got invited for lunch, and then they invited me to work for them. And
how did you learn Bengali?
Just by being with people. Yeah. Just.
How long did it take you?
Well, I already knew some Hindi, but the Hindi I knew was, it's still a problem. My daughter laughs at me a lot because I learned a dialect. It's called Bhojpuri. Okay. So when people, it would be like somebody here hearing somebody from the Mississippi Delta kind of speaking English. Because, right. So I got like Delta Hindi, you know. But it was coming because I was 24 hours a day pretty much, you know, or I was immersed in it, and then I remember at a certain point I can almost remember the moment where I say, let go of the blocks. You don't need the structure. Just let it happen. Mm-hmm. So in other words, I stopped trying to do it. Mm-hmm. I stopped translating. You know, I just said, you're not here. Don't be like I'm talking to you now. Yes. I'm not thinking about a noun, verb, this, that, whatever. You know, I just allowed it out, and the same thing happened. I just said, just let it happen. You know,
you're talking about Bengali now?
Bengali. It's Bengali.
So they found out that this was a kid going.
Well, in those days, I mean, I spoke more Bangla than they did, but I also mixed it up with Hindi a lot in those days. Right. So, for example, they're like French and Spanish in ways. And so in Bengali it's panch, and in Hindi it's panch. You know, there's like, but no, anyway. But they knew that they're in their offices, they're delivering boxes, they're riding around in Jeeps, and somebody heard about it. And I'll tell you, quite frankly, at that point I had no money, I had nothing.
Yes.
So anyway, so they invited me. It took a while before I got all the clearances, so I went up and back to the States, and then I went up to Newfoundland, had some wonderful experiences there as
But
well.
why did they bring you back once they...
Well, so they wanted me. So eventually, when all these clearances, the U.S. government and so on and so forth came through, they invited me there, and I worked with them for a year, and then said I wasn't going to continue. And this gets back to our fish again. And my boss, who was a Welshman who had been a conscientious objector in World War II,
Right.
He said, "All right, do whatever you want to do. Do your own program." And so it was originally it became the UNICEF. I founded the nutrition program for UNICEF, and very much had to do with fish culture in those days. And then I got involved with wild fish and so on and so forth. So it was a very non-traditional. I worked with a lot of non-governmental organizations who, some of whom I'm still associated with.
So they wanted you to do some of the work you did there in other parts of the world.
No. In Bangladesh. I did in Bangladesh.
But then after you were done over there...
I went back and forth for years. I started new projects and so on. But I did get to do some work, and I did spend some time in Mexico. I did some work in East Africa. I attended conferences and meetings and stuff.
And who was sponsoring all this? You said that.
Well, at one point, the Ford Foundation sponsored when I started doing some of the work on my own. They attended a meeting where I presented the stuff on nutrition and biodiversity and fisheries, and then they said, "Could you write a paper for us on what we should be doing about environment and fisheries in Bangladesh?" And I wrote that we have to reopen the connections between the rivers and the floodplains, and eventually they funded this organization that still goes on to this day. At a certain point, this organization I worked with, it was called the People's Health Center, Gonoshashta Kendra, it's a world-famous organization for their innovations in healthcare, using paramedics and women and all different kinds of occupations. And they were using an injectable contraceptive called Depo-Provera. And so they asked me my opinion of it. I was living in the UK at the time, so I started researching. I thought, everyone says it's perfectly safe, so I wanted to see how they knew it was perfectly safe. And that's the first time I came across the word immunosuppression. And I began to realize it was being promoted as perfectly safe, but in fact there was a lot of reasons to believe it wasn't. So then I wound up connecting with the women's health movement around the world.
Wow.
And I became a spokesperson for the National Women's Health Network, actually.
So, and at the same time you were sort of an investigative reporter?
Then I did some investigative reporting.
Yeah,
Writing about that, other things as well. I did. I part of a team that won a National Magazine Award for that kind of stuff. It was always tenuous economically. It's not as if you're on the wrong side. And then the final thing that.
What do you mean the wrong side? You were.
For example, the people who were. There was a huge push to promote Depo-Provera. It still is to this day, because there was a confusion between deliberate muddling between population control, women's health, maternal and child health, and so on. And I have nothing against contraception. I have no ideological thing, but in fact, I want to know that the proper work has been done to see whether or not the drug you're promoting is safe. And I wrote a paper called Depo-Provera Critical Analysis, which caused an explosion around the world. It was in a journal, and governments started pulling the drug from. It's a whole other side story.
Was it in most countries in the world?
Oh, yeah. In the United States, too. Well, in the United States, it wasn't approved for a long time, but then because it couldn't get past the FDA, but eventually what happened was they said, "Oh, look, it's been used in all these other countries for so many years, so it must be safe," because it wasn't studied. And this is a whole other thing. You don't want to get into that.
Like an ocean.
Like an ocean. I did.
Like
an ocean.
So expensive. Right. You've gone to so many
Right.
places. It's so much. What do you think is most essential to you in life?
Yeah, this is a good. I saw that question.
What is that most essential?
I think it. I would love to be kind of like heroic image of an ideal person who's doing all these different kinds of things. But often, I also found I had roadblocks that would stop me from taking things further and so on. So, but I've always had this, I always wanted to get into things more deeply. I always kind of punched above my weight in the sense that I got into things far more than, let's say, my education warranted, but at the same time got a great deal of respect at a high level, which gets us to this other project. I wrote a book on the history of AIDS, and unfortunately, and I have an endorsement. The head of health sciences research at the Mayo Clinic wrote me a strong endorsement, and he'd been my scientific backstop for this book. But it would always get up to a certain level. Editors loved it. It was getting, and then it would always get pulled. And get up to this level and get pulled. It went on for years and years and years that way because I challenged certain basic assumptions. Status quo. Yes. Very, very, but in a way that was hard. That was based in research, really deep research, and also a broad-minded view. So, basically, again, I came across a great deal of opposition to this day. I was with a group of people who believed that medical injections, were a major cause for the transmission of HIV in Africa, and they were saying it's just strictly sexual. But there's let's see if I can just find this one.
If you could tell us.
Well, this is let's see. This is the last paragraph in my book. Okay. Unless Africans were superhumans, both in terms of their sexual appetites and time management skills, there could not have been enough frequency and variability of partners to explain the epidemiology of the HIV/AIDS tragedy in sub-Saharan Africa. It would seem that the most plausible explanation is that the fires of sustained heterosexual epidemics reported in Africa were stoked by the massive introduction of HIV into communities via contaminated injections and transfusions by poorly resourced and often poorly trained healthcare providers. So this went against, the Africans are all oversexed. And I kind of said, when I heard that, I said, well, I've heard that about black people all my life,
Yes,
so,
right.
So, So there's so many projects.
What do you think your calling in life has been? It sounds like you were disturbing a lot of the status quo, a lot of things that were accepted as normal, and yet you questioned that, and you went deeper than just questioning.
Right.
Researched, and you fought for some changes.
Right. Well, I it's kind of hard to say at this point in my life. I can say there were phases. What it's been. A friend of mine once said, I always look at the. People talk about the glass half empty, but they always say I always look at the glass from the bottom up.
Yes,
So I think that's part of it. I mean, I want to see different angles and things, and for example, I got into writing out of activism. I did, and I even got into poetry eventually. Poetry originally out of a broken heart, but then out of activism, as well. But things change over time. I mean, I feel I'm supporting people who are doing good work in Brattleboro, for example, on issues of Palestine, Trump, Yemen, all these different kinds of things, and so on. So I do what I can. I write articles. If you look, you can look me up in Common Dreams, Steve Minkin in Common Dreams. I have a number of articles that I've written there
about what's happening. So you have the poetry book that just came out. Can you read a couple of poems?
Sure.
So basically now it's the broken heart of what we're experiencing now. As a community,
sure.
Of the loss of morality.
Right. So it's called Moral Oblivion, which really is. All right. So this first one, this one was written shortly after the October 7th Hamas attacks and so on. and then what the response was going to be, and it's called shoelaces.
Mm-hmm.
I keep tying and untying my shoelaces, splitting hairs over definitions in the absence of meanings, like little dolls bundled preterm on the hospital floor, called like the memories of tortured pasts, genocide, Holocaust, 8 million then, now unimaginable, to the point of forgetting where we came from, why we are here. Yeah.
What a moment.
Yeah, what a moment, you know, and then, actually, I'll do this next one as well, and then, this was called My Fears, November 19, 2023, all right, so it's shortly after the October stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I fear the chaos in thought, the unexamined chaos in thought. I fear the inhumanity, its power to shape events. I fear the impossibility of pausing, stepping back from the static. I fear ambient projectiles blowing up dreams. I fear the extinction of the commandment, thou shalt not kill. I fear the bombs and cruelty, the cries of child ghosts in shrouds. I fear the deniers, the justifiers. I fear indifference. Yeah.
I really admire you that in that avalanche of just horrible things happening to us as a society, as the world, you're able to express some of those very deep emotions that not just you, but all of us.
All of us, yeah, we're all
at least half saying are feeling that
right.
This is insane. That the idea that we shouldn't kill is just overwritten.
Oh, it's just it's gone. I mean, it's just like.
And then the lies instead of it.
Oh, justifying
lies.
Justifying genocide,
Yes.
and so on and so on. It goes on and on. This one, all right. So I'm Jewish by birth, culturally, and so. What's going on in terms of genocide, I feel as if that Jews should have a major responsibility not to be committing genocide, but to resisting it, and especially when it's being done by other Jews.
Exactly.
But anyway, this poem is called Soap. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh yes, the digits of one hand, the members of my family, mother, father, brother, and for many years, bicycles, squirrels, and God. Oh yes, I had what you would call a personal relationship. Often on the way to the synagogue, I can't remember what we talked about. Mostly I walked alone to shul. I remember the Korean War. There was a photo I'd seen of a dead soldier. Clean cut, crew cut. He was lying face down, seeing where the bullet entered the back of his head. He seemed so young, even to me at 7. I remember the atom bomb drills. We'd go out to the hall to get our coats, and then go under our desks, coats over our heads. I felt secure, protected by my coat and desk, whereas at night in bed, I worried about the bomb. I remember images on TV, mounds of bodies, piles of Jews, and people, their bones showing, starved, haunted Jews in striped jackets. I remember talking to God about this. I often talk to God. And in Sunday school, I'd bring 15 cents to buy a stamp for a tree in Israel, knowing that the Jews there were making the desert bloom, and that there was a tree there with my name. I remember the terror of my bar mitzvah service, not being well prepared, but how I knew the Saturday service by heart. I remember we had poor seats in the back during the high holidays, and walking with Michael Adlerstein, who became a physicist, talking about God. I remember the rabbi, I loved, a man of the mind, his sermons my introduction to the intellect. And the disappointment I felt when I was in college because he failed to condemn Vietnam. That Jews should side with civil rights and oppose war. This put an end to my conversations with God. I remember as a child spinning the globe, my finger landing on different countries, and how I knew one day I would move far away. I remember being told many times, "You don't look Jewish."
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I've written a lot about, the situation in Gaza and so on. It's just, it's
You know, it's like
and the lies and this and that, and now Harvard's anti-Semitic and this is that. You know, using anti-Semitism as an excuse.
yes.
The Forward is the oldest Jewish newspaper in the country. It's in Yiddish and English, and they have somebody who has what do you call it? You know, a thing on the side where you can Google, you can text your way in, and it's called the anti-Semitic meter. And what it does, it looks at real stuff and bullshit, and it kind of separates out the two, you know. So anyway.
Is this a website? Or
Yeah, it's a website. I'll send you the link
Okay,
if you
we
like
can
it.
put a link
Yeah, I'll put a link into it.
because, you
Yeah.
know, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, because because this is being used as a weapon. Yes, it's real anti-Semitic. Trump and his people were full of it, you know.
Yeah.
But now they're using it. They found a really good weapon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then again, you know, just like people in Israel, people in the United States, you know, so many people around the world disagree with their leaders.
Oh, of course.
And they hate them.
Right, right. But it's very complicated. In Israel, it's complicated, certainly.
Yes.
But I mean, and we have this. I mean, this horrible situation now. So don't actually. I forgot to bring a paper with a couple of newer poems. But I do have a poem which basically, because it gets into this contradiction now.
Yes.
I mean, the poem basically, you should never summarize a poem or part, but the first part of the poem is how I kind of get up in the morning and I embrace all these different things and so on and so forth. And the second part of the poem, in the evening, I stick pins into dolls because I think about the people being deported, and and like in a voodoo way, trying to stick pins into dolls of their oppressors, of ice and all of that, ice and the people who created it, you know.
Yes.
So on one hand, I have this new drawing now where suddenly I can take a piece of charcoal and the next thing you know, an idea comes up. So I'm trying to think how I can, with visual things as well, express the kind of emotions and thoughts I've had with my writing. But I'm a long way from that. Long way from that.
Wow.
But I've been given a gift where suddenly I have drawing, which, you know, has become a passion as well.
So let me ask you a question, because this program is about being,
Right.
not making a list
Right.
of things you have to do,
Right.
and you know, doing, admiring people for doing,
Right.
you know, becoming an architect
right,
or a director, or,
Right.
and just more, you know, flowing in life.
Right.
Just going back to the theme of water and fish, just flowing. So do you feel like your life has been?
Let me just tell you
Yes,
a little story
Yes.
that relates to this. So I was in Bangladesh working with my fish friends, you know, and so we're in a government guest house, and I go into the bathroom and I see the most beautiful moth I'd ever seen in my life in the bathroom.
Moth?
A moth, a large moth. It was
yes.
stunningly beautiful.
Large?
Very, very large. And I was saying, wow, I wonder what it's doing in the bathroom. So the next morning I wake up, the moth is still there, and I think, well, for some reason it got stuck in the bathroom, right? So I very, very gently take a piece of paper and slide it underneath, and I carry it out, and there's like a wall on this veranda, a low wall on the veranda, and I slowly put it onto the wall. And we're out all day. Maybe, you know, we left early in the morning. We come back about 4 or 5 o'clock, and the moth is still there. So I say, I wonder if it's dead. You know, maybe it's dead. So again, you know, being the human or whatever, I decide to kind of give it a little poke. and it flies up, and just at that moment, a bird comes diving down, and my heart stopped. It didn't move because the bird and the moth were just waiting, and then it took a little move like this, and the bird missed it.
Good.
So what I'm saying is, like, nature, its own rhythms and things, and so on and so forth. And I admire scientists who get into things deeply, but at the same time, there are powers and ways of communicating and a wisdom that so the less arrogant we are. That idea again, knowing the vastness of my ignorance, that one lesson would come back to me over and over and over again. At the same time, you've tried to do what you can. We in English use the term untouchable. When I was in India, in those days, they were called Harijans, the children of God. That was a term Gandhi made, and now they're called Dalits. But within there's levels and levels. And the people I was with, they were officially called the rat eaters by the government.
Oh my God.
And the reason was they would go to the burrows, the rat's burrows, and they'd kill the rat and steal the rice that the rat stole from the field. That's how oppressed they were. And they were so oppressed. Human beings were so oppressed. Like if somebody from a higher caste would say, if I saw they were called bunya. If I saw a bunya with a new shirt on, I couldn't eat until I got that shirt off of them. So I realized that India was a very violent place. When I went there, I thought, Gandhi, yeah. But in fact, I was thrust into this terrible violence. So I got to see the world from another point of view.
And the classes that exist, right now with the oligarchy versus people who are, hungry right now.
Exactly.
It's just like so absurd.
What they're doing to people, like they're sending people to South Sudan.
Yeah.
Does anyone know what South Sudan is? People even know what South Sudan is? It's maybe the newest country, but it's probably the poorest country, and it's in the middle of a civil war, and you're going to take people who know nothing about South Sudan, and you're going to incarcerate them there because they wanted the American dream? This is ridiculous. It's horrible.
To be with their families.
Sure, as our family did, and so on.
Exactly.
It's
absurd. Trump's own family was born to not a citizen.
Right.
Because his first wife wasn't a citizen.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But sure. Right. And now that son should not have birthright.
It's just absurd. It's like, capitalism. The very last stages of capitalism.
Well, this is fascism. What we're in now. This is definitely. I think I know what living fascism is like now. As we're.
We didn't expect we would know, right?
No, we didn't expect. No, like Marty, our friend Marty.
Yes.
I years ago, I have a poem where I got Marty Jaser, where I went to his grave, and I tried to explain to him what was going on. But this was like George Bush. When trying to explain what's going on with Trump now. It's like, so this is about the refugees, but this is, it's called pathology. You stayed on the path, farmed your fields, married at the right time, prayed, harvested grapes, attended to the olive trees, sent your daughter to school, herding goats. She dreamed of becoming an engineer. Politicians, generals, bureaucrats, knowing nothing of olive trees, the abundance of grapes, or gold herders studying trigonometry. Faraway men make serious plans. The construction of events destroys everything. Past obliterated, crossing borders, refugee, fodder for demagogues. Yeah.
Oh, well, I would like to ask you something about.
Please do.
Religion, spirituality. So what has religion and what has spirituality meant to you in this life?
Okay. Well, there are a couple of ways of approaching this. It's a shame. I left a poem in the car, which is basically, it's called Being Stalked by God. Yeah. And all of these kind of humorous kind of things, which kind of, when I was young, although my family wasn't very religious, I was kind of very religious. And like I said, I had conversations with God and this and that and so on. Later, I was very attracted to Eastern religions.
How old were you then?
When I got attracted to Eastern religions?
Yes.
Well, I'd say I started probably in high school. I was very interested in China. I used to get this bilingual newspaper where the Chinese part of the newspaper would come out on the front of the, and I would, I gave them instead of Steve Minkin, I said my name was Minkin. And let's see, but then so by the time I got into college, I mean, Herman Hesse, all these other kind of things, but I got into, what was the guy who wrote those wonderful Zen books back in the day? Anyway, but then when I went to Alan Watts, I got very into Alan Watts, exactly. Yeah. But then my first trip to India, I was introduced to a man named Munindra, who people who are involved with the center in Barrie would know very well. And so
Goenka?
Later I went to Goenka. Later, yes. So during the famine, I got introduced Munindra to what was called Anapana, so the kind of the breathing kind of thing, and and then later I was in Bodh Gaya, where Buddha was enlightened. That's where Vinoba Bhabhi sent me to be, Bodh Gaya, and I heard about this man Goenka. I kept on hearing his name, yes. Goenka, and then I was with a man named Dwarko Sundrani, who was the head of this Gandhian ashram there, who was like a father to me in a way. And this car pulls in, and a man comes out, and he's talking the most beautiful Hindi I'd ever heard in my life. And there was something, he seemed to be aware of things in a way I couldn't understand. And Dwarko's brother had, I think, pretended to try to commit suicide, and Goenka came to help him and so on. So I didn't know it was Goenka. The man came, left, and then I said to Dwarko, "Who's this man?" He said, "Goenka. I've been looking for him forever." Wow. So then I wound up in doing a 10-day course with him, and then others, and so on, and then.
So are you still meditating?
Well, I'm not actively doing it now. I think I go through long periods of doing it. Yes. Then usually when I go to Bangladesh, I can't keep it up for some reason because there's absolutely no privacy and so on. Right. But I mean, I feel I learned so much from Goenka, so much, and so I helped found the center in Shelburne Falls and so on. But I mean, I was one of the people who sat with them. You've done many courses there?
Yes.
Oh, how wonderful! So oh, good. So we should talk more about that. You'll see when he talks about, at a certain point, he talks about people doing things like writing an article. And I wrote an article. I was the editor of the East-West Journal, and I wrote this article exploring the path to enlightenment. And the center just had a few people, and suddenly they had hundreds of people after that. So it kind of helped kickstart. I was very lucky. I got to spend so much time with him. I would be his chauffeur when he came to Boston.
So what's one thing that you remember about Goenka?
Oh, I remember so much. I remember something. I'll tell you something. So Goenka, his wife, and I are in Boston at a fabric shop. And she's picking out fabrics. Mrs. Goenka, okay. All right? And she's picking out fabrics. And he was absolutely, folding, unfolding. He was so there. Like this, it's just like, this is what we're doing. And
really present.
Really present. And he gave me a lot of gifts.
Was he enlightened, do you think?
Well, I don't know what the term means, but
that somebody can be enlightened?
I believe there are moments when, I think the question in my mind, and of course I can't say much, but my question is, how long can you stay enlightened? Whatever he was continuous. It's not just the insights, but beyond that, I've been filled with metta love from him, in ways that, and he, when he heard that I was looking after my father when my father was dying, he wrote to me. So yeah, I think I don't know if it's for everyone, but I think those courses are pretty amazing.
Thank you so much for doing this, because I know it saved my life a couple of times when my mom-in-law was dying. Right. I mean, after she had passed.
Oh, that's sorry. What if we haven't done this? I never would have known that you're a Vipassana meditation. So I wrote that article. And then Bill Hart. Did you ever see that book, The Art of Living?
Yes.
So there's some of The Art of Living has the interview I did with Goenka is in it actually, and so I got but I was there with what they used to call the gypsy camps in India, and then in setting up the center here.
Wow. What a gift.
Oh, what about tremendous opportunity? I mean, to be able to spend personal time with him.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
What do you think of his wife?
Oh, she was wonderful. She was my Mataji. She was wonderful. Yes. One time I was after a course, we had a Jain vihara, Jain temple, this huge complex. The Jains, Lord Mahavir, existed around the same time as Buddha, and that a lot of the thinking was similar. But then, in Goenka's way, they went off; they became too extreme. So, like instead of shaving the heads, they'd pull each hair out and things like that. So anyway, after a wonderful course with these Jain monks and nuns, I was asked to give a talk on Vipassana in Hindi to this large group. And I remember looking at Mataji, and then she just kind of,
Yes.
You can do it. So.
Yes, God bless you.
Yeah, she just with love. Just anyway, but certainly my perspective on reality and things changing and so on and so forth. I mean, I right now. I mean, I'm thinking again that I have to kind of again take a course and get back into it because. I react so strongly to things now.
Right. So when was your last course that you took?
About 3 or 4 years. During it was still COVID time actually. Okay. It was still during COVID or just after COVID. And I had a good run. I had about 2 or 3 years, but then I was back in Bangladesh, and it's just I don't know why. It's been always in my history. You're involved with people too long today. But anyway, what was your last course?
But I just wanted to go back to just continue with this one. So do you, right now you're teaching and you are, I'm sure, bombarded by everything that's happening, even if you don't put the TV on.
Oh, no, I'm bombarded all the time. And I go deeply into things, Sudan, everything,
Do you go into meditation every day, or it's just part of you now? Or?
I am guilty. I'm not doing it. I should be. I feel more and more that if I don't, I'll go in a bad place, headwise and so on. But I try to be active. So
what do you think is happening spiritually, at this point? Because politically, we know it's fascism. But what's happening to this planet spiritually? Do you have a sense?
Well, this is also. I think. It's an interesting question because now, I mean, you have, let's say, in Hindu time, you have what was called the yugas. The Kali Yuga, I believe, is one where you start getting into decline. I might be wrong about that, but I think we're in politically, and it has to do with mentally and spiritually. I think we're moving to a place where there's a rigidity at the highest levels. There's violence permeating at different kinds of levels. I mean, where I live in Vermont, I live in a bubble. We try, we protest, we do this and that and so on. But
there are drugs there, right?
Well, we have a drug problem there as well. Yeah, sure.
There are very expensive prices at the restaurants that not everybody can.
Oh yeah, the street. It's no. I'm saying it's possible to. It's this contradiction in terms of living at these times. I want to be able to still take walks and swim and this and that and so on. I want to be able to draw. I want to be able to write poetry. I want to be able to read poetry. Yes. And at the same time, I see the homeless. I see the. Yeah. The drug problem is huge because a friend of mine's son is just, he's given up everything for drugs and so on. But the society, the direction of the society is that we're going in now, and the direction going in is to make things worse. Ignorance. I started reading 1984 again, yes. and one of the lines is, "Ignorance is strength," and yes. and basically, I think this is what he's doing with the colleges and everything now as well. Ignorance and strength. Let's see. Hold on here. Just the fact that we're children being taught that slavery was a good thing. It's just kind of.
And not being allowed to read the real.
Yeah. Right here. This is called. This is called Shameful. It's a companion poem. I don't think we'll have time for it. The companion poem is called Critical Race History. Shameful. In front of our very eyes, time is being dragged backward in Florida. 160 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, children are now legally required to learn about the benefits of slavery. Slave master myths used to justify whips, torture, rape, the buying and selling of humanity. It's kind of that there's this push for ignorance is just
instead of learning more and uncovering all the lies.
Yeah, it's one thing you can challenge things. You can say, well, this your ideology and makes you see. But the thing is, you have to learn scholarship. Well, all right. So let me do. I'll read its companion. Okay. This is called Critical Race History. Mm-hmm. Okay. Critical Race History. A compromise, toiling, 3/5, pulling stumps out of swamp ovens filled with poisonous snakes, making levees for cotton plantations, wealth builders for the descendants of Scots fleeing the brutality of the English. Wealth builders, bound, whipped, toiling, tortured, kidnapped, raped, sold, blazing sun, freezing cold, mothers and daughters, boys and men, their value being bales of cotton. Chain ganged, race riot dispossessed, segregated, redlined, lynchings, now captured on cell phones. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. It's.
It's difficult to summarize your life. It's been like we said, like a Mississippi River or like an ocean,
Maybe the Ganges, the Brahmaputra. I think the Brahmaputra. I think.
And it seems like you have fought for the truth. Also examine deeper wherever you went, not just the status quo, and try to help. Going through different stages. By the way, I didn't even ask, where were you born and your early years?
I was born in Brooklyn, New York.
Oh.
All right. And then.
How old were you when you left Brooklyn?
Well, when I was 5, we moved to Long Island, just close to the city.
And where in Long Island?
A place called Elmont.
Okay.
It's right on the city line.
And then you left for college, right?
Well, no, I actually stayed home for college, and I went to a college nearby, but it was Hofstra University. Yeah, and then later, so then I got a Fulbright to India. First, I got Hofstra sent me for 2 months to India as the university ambassador, and then after that, I came back. I almost dropped out of school because after 2 months in India, college didn't make much sense to me. But then I got a Fulbright, and if I didn't graduate, so I had to go to all of my professors and let them make up everything I missed. So then I did that.
And what was your major?
Well, as an undergraduate, it was political science with an Asia studies kind of minor or certificate or something. And then later I was at State University of Stony Brook, but I was but I was asked to leave in the best interest of the university because I was organizing the draft resistance and so on. And then later I did have a year at Cambridge as well, studying social anthropology. And
which helped with your writing and your
that helped. Cambridge really helped me because I was totally unprepared. I had been a UN bureaucrat at that point, working for UNICEF and so on. But what would happen is I'd have a tutor, and she and I would have a discussion. She'd say, "All right, read this 7 or 8 books, for next week." And I learned how to really go through books fast. And then you'd have to produce a paper every week. And then the first time I thought it was just loose notes, and I got clobbered by one person who wouldn't even see me anymore. But then a more kind-hearted person worked with me. And the thing is, so then I'd really had a one-on-one where I'm writing things, and not only the English and grammar, but my thought process, she was looking at the way you're looking at me and kind of said, well, this, that, so on and so forth. And can you do this and you do that? So I think that was very, very helpful in terms of discipline. It was, and to be in the Cambridge libraries was fantastic.
I think the professors appreciated your experiences too.
They did. Well, let me tell you how I got admitted to Cambridge. I was not the kind of person where I put in an application. I was told by a friend. I have a daughter who was born in Cambridge, and I went to live with her and her mother, and I was told, there's this guy in the anthropology department you should meet, Alan McFarlane. So I went to see him. I kind of came to his office and said, I was in Bangladesh, and so he pours me a glass of sherry, and we drink a glass of sherry, and then he pours me a second glass of sherry. And halfway through the second glass, he said, "How would you like to be admitted to the university?" And that's how I got into Cambridge.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's unusual.
In those days, it was still kind of, the professor had the power and this and that and so on. And the conversation was enough, Did
you study with that professor later?
Well, I studied with a number of them there, but
with the one that's...
Well, I did study with him as well, but with others as well.
Yes, So, besides education and your work and travel, you have children.
Yes.
How many children?
3.
3. And do you think that your children also help you to be in this world, not just do, to kind of...
Well, I think when... it depends on what stages they were going through. Sometimes being intensely in this world is. But no, I have a great love for my children. I think that I think I'm very blessed to have such wonderful children.
And if you have any advice for the younger folks?
Well, I think when you turn 80, if you're not drawing, start drawing. Or if not, play music or do, it's just, this is my new, it's just my new.
Show us again.
There's these guys here, but there are others as well. I don't know what to do. It just came, but no, I think that 80 has to have good friends. Like I have good friends with Arlene and so on. I think it's really, it's important to keep, as well as you can, to keep active. I think that's extremely important. I still do Pilates. The kids are 20 and 30 years old in the class, and yet at the same time, I'm not tattooed yet, but I think eventually I'll learn a tattoo. But if I had a chance to go back to Bangladesh and do something, I think I would. Whatever. Let's face it. Life is fixed, and when you get to 80, you begin to understand how fixed it is. I remember years ago, the first time I really understood I was mortal, I had a fever for a few days when I was at UNICEF, and this Bangladeshi doctor, Harun, came in, and I said, "Harun, I had a fever all night." And he says, "Stick your tongue out." And I did, and he says, "You have typhoid." And I remember at that moment I stopped everything. I suddenly understood I was mortal. I just,
Yes.
yeah.
Is there anything else you would like to add?
I just want to say, Renata, you're just wonderful. To talk with you, to have the opportunity,
Thank you.
the privilege of spending this time in a conversation with you is priceless.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I'm very honored and also have learned so much about you.